South Africans had hoped a presidential visit to the U.S. would offer a reset and a path to a trade deal. That seems all but impossible after an extraordinary Oval Office meeting today. President Donald Trump reiterated his claims that South Africa is persecuting white minority farmers. It put President Cyril Ramaphosa in a tough diplomatic spot. The CBC's Aaron Collins is tracking developments. He joins us live from our Washington bureau. So, Aaron, what happened?
But you got the word right there, the right adjective, Andrew. Just an absolutely extraordinary scene. So much to unpack here in this 60-minute meeting broadcast live that felt more like we were watching sort of a tense behind closed doors conversation between two heads of state, but on live television, interrupted by reporters. I can say, I think fairly, that this is probably not how South African President Cyril Ramaphosa wanted this meeting to go. I mean, Ramaphosa started by following what seems like a developing playbook for heads of state that are meeting with the U.S. president. So step one, keep it cordial. If you can, talk about golf. If you really can, bring some pro golfers with you. That's going to help. Complement the decor of the Oval Office, and then put your focus on trade if you can. That's the plan, but staying on track. It's just not easy with this president, right, Andrew? Things seemed to start out pretty well, but they shifted quickly after Trump got a question about accepting dozens of white South African refugees a little over a week ago from the press that were in the room.
You're taking people's land away
we have not.
From them. And those people, in many cases, are being executed. They're being executed. And they happen to be white, and most of them happen to be farmers. Mm-hmm. And that's a tough situation. I don't know how you explain that. How do you explain that? They're taking people's land away, and in many cases, those people are being executed. And in many cases, it's not the government that's doing it. It's people that kill them and then take their land, and nothing happens to them.
Andrew, just the look on President Ramaphosa's face as you hear Donald Trump repeating the justification for bringing those South Africans to the U.S. Accusations, as you heard there, that those farmers are being attacked and in some cases killed, and their land often being confiscated.
And how did the South African delegation respond?
Well, I think, watching it, I think initially President Ramaphosa was hoping that this topic might just slide by. He could shift things back toward talk of trade, maybe bring this up behind closed doors, as would usually happen in a high-level meeting like this. But the president just wasn't having it, right? And that's when things got really off track. The White House then started playing, it was like a montage of news clips, sort of backing up the president's claims, apparently. And Trump had a handful of news clippings in his hand, too. So, I mean, the takeaway here, clearly, for me, this was planned, right? You don't have the montage ready to play and the news clips printed out if you weren't planning to do this on camera for a live audience. And you could see President Ramaphosa sort of begin to firm up a little, firmly but patiently start pushing back, explaining that, yes, some white South Africans are victims of violence in that country, but so are many, many, many black South Africans that are in the same boat or feeling this same kind of impact. Honestly, though, Andrew, to me, it wasn't until one of the professional golfers and the wealthy businessmen in the room sort of spoke up from the delegation that you could see Trump beginning to listen a little bit.
And I know there's a lot of anger, through the transition. There was also a lot of stuff happening in the apartheid days. We grew up in the apartheid era. But I don't think two wrongs makes a right. President Mandela, when he came out of prison for all that time, didn't come out with hatred.
We have too many deaths, but it's across the board. It's not only white farmers, it's across the board.
So I'm not saying that the professional golfer or the billionaire changed President Trump's mind, but it did appear to me that he sort of leaned in, he began to listen a little bit more. So just, so much to unpack today, a truly extraordinary scene at the White House.
This is a live view of the White House. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to leave the White House shortly. A short time ago, U.S. President Donald Trump held a tense meeting with him in the Oval Office. Trump confronted the South African leader, repeating his claims that white farmers are the victims of a genocide in South Africa. The visiting president is looking to reset the relationship with the U.S. Let's go to Johannesburg, South Africa for reaction. I'm joined by Lerato Mbele, a former BBC presenter. Lerato, what do you make of President Trump using this event to make these claims of mass killings of white farmers?
Well, for South Africans, it's very concerning because albeit South Africa's got a very serious crime problem. They say that the murder rate in South Africa is often higher than what you see in a war zone. But these crimes affect mainly Black and poor South Africans. So there isn't any kind of concerted effort to exterminate a particular group of people, particularly white farmers. Certainly the statistics don't back it up. And when we have seen instances of violence on South African farms, in the 2020 figures, it said that only 49 farm murders occurred in that year alone. So you can't really call that an extermination. One life lost is one life too many. We accept that, but it is not a concerted attack against white people or white farmers in particular. And while South Africa does have a crime and violence problem, it disproportionately impacts the poor, the unemployed, women in the case of GBV, and Black men. So the narrative that's been peddled in the United States is grossly inaccurate, and it's not really favorable for South Africa's image internationally. And I think South Africans are just asking themselves the question, why does Secretary of State Rubio and his team, why do they insist on peddling this narrative? What is this insistence on driving or creating a particular picture or image of South Africa? And why are they married to the disinformation campaign? There are many ways in which to criticize South Africa. It's not a perfect country, but to really insist on a narrative that's based on falsities, it's very disconcerting. And South Africans are asking themselves why.
And Lerato, it's not just Secretary Rubio. I mean, it was the President of the United States sitting there with the President of South Africa, very focused, very kind of going on and on about this, as you say, pushing these assertions. And it seemed to be something that he wanted to speak about at great length. I mean, what was that like to watch?
Yeah. Very, very uncomfortable. And it almost felt like a Zelensky 2.0, where 2 months ago we saw a similar kind of dressing down of the Ukrainian president by the American president and his vice president, J.D. Vance. So it felt very much like an ambush. That's certainly how the media is reporting on it. And it felt very disrespectful. The president of South Africa, at the invitation of the president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, had gone to America to try to thaw out, reset what he says are frosty relations between the two countries, largely because, South Africans believe, because South Africa has taken a pretty direct and moral stand on the situation between Gaza and Israel's offensive in Gaza. It was South Africa that really launched the very first case at the ICJ at The Hague. So there's often a sense that because America is a very strong ally of Israel, perhaps this is a pushback of some sort. But South Africa has always insisted that its position in world affairs is non-aligned. They retain the sovereign right to have relationships with whomever they deem fit. They insist that the foreign policy is predicated on a world that is based on equity and mutual respect. And they will call out countries that they believe violate international norms, principles, and Geneva Conventions. But if this is a backlash, it's gone very, very far. And it manifested itself in an intent to humiliate the South African leadership. If that wasn't the intent of the American government, but to really showcase a problem that a segment of the South African population says exists, well, we can talk about the problems of South Africa in its racial polarities because they are historical problems, but not on the basis of misinformation and lies and statistical inaccuracies as well. And I think this is very concerning for the South African government and for the South African people, and it was uncomfortable to watch.
And how, I mean, I know it just happened, but how did you talked about how the media and how the people in South Africa saw this? How do people feel as though the president of South Africa handled himself in the face of this?
Yeah. Okay, so there's two sides. There's a school of thought that says the president handled himself with the requisite restraint and diplomacy and humility. And then other people say he was very soft. He should have gone hard to correct the myths, the misinformation, to fix the lies. So I think it depends on which side of the pendulum you sit. But the president did stress, especially when the videos were produced of Julius Malema, that Julius Malema, albeit he's a very popular figure in South Africa and he's a populist politician, he is a member of the opposition and not even an official or the leader of the official opposition. His party only garnered 9% of the votes in the general elections last year. So 9% is hardly representative of the voting public in South Africa. And so to use the views of a minority opposition leader and say it represents government policy in South Africa is woefully inaccurate. But the president could have gone further than that, than just to say Julius Malema doesn't speak for all South Africans. He's not a member of the government in South Africa. He's a member of parliament. Yes, he participates in the democracy, but he's not a policy maker. And then I think he could have gone further to demonstrate with his delegation that South Africa is still dealing with a lot of legacy issues born of apartheid, which, as you know, is a historical program of racial segregation in the country. And 30 years into democracy, it's been really difficult to create a kind of social cohesion in South Africa. Yes, there've been great strides, but you still see so many of those historical structural inequalities manifest in the country. There's a huge inequality gap in South Africa. I think we've got one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world. And so if you look at the picture of South Africa superficially, the rich continue to be white South Africans with that historical privilege. The poor continue to be Black South Africans who are agitated and anxious and want to see real material change. It's hard to execute that real material change in a country whose economy can't even grow at 1% per annum. And with globalization and global inflation and all of those kinds of issues adding to the complexity of the South African economy. And so to bring South Africans together, it's hard at a material level, but it doesn't mean that South Africans are living here constantly at loggerheads in hatred and killing one another. That is inaccurate. It is misinformation. It is disinformation. Even the statistics on violence and crime don't bear it up. And to insist that that's what's happening in a country that is really trying to grapple with a whole lot of other social issues around job creation, poverty, and inequality, and to racialize it, it is disingenuous. It's disrespectful, and really and truly, it doesn't do all South Africans, Black, white, and Indian, any favor, because South Africans believe in the country that this is and want to see it work. But that's not for me to say. The president and his delegation needed to articulate that strongly as a rebuttal, because the comments that President Trump presented are true comments. They've been made by Julius Malema. In fact, Julius Malema even found himself in court recently over some of his utterances as to whether or not some of the things he says, is it hate speech or not? The court said no, it's freedom of expression, contentious, but it's not unconstitutional and against the law. But politicians could be doing a lot to sing from the same hymn sheet to bring this rainbow nation together the way Nelson Mandela had wanted to do. And the president of South Africa had to articulate that.
Loreto, thank you very much. Appreciate your insight. Loreto Mbele in Johannesburg, South Africa. And just on your right of your screen, we're seeing the South African president leaving the White House as we speak after that contentious meeting with Donald Trump.